At that time, this little girl came through very clearly, and she said to me, tell my mom that I'll be back in a couple months. My soul just was not ready yet for this world.
Channeling has been with us throughout the ages. We describe it as communication to or through a live human from a source that's other than the physical as we know it.
Helen Iwabe is the Director of Research at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, one of the few places where parapsychological phenomena can be evaluated through rigorous scientific method.
I started channeling at a very young age, but I didn't really realize initially that that's what I was doing. And then eventually I started working with special needs kids, and primarily kids that had autism and that were nonverbal. And I started realizing there was a method of communication that had nothing to do with language or words, and it was all between our minds, and really started thinking, wow, there's something to this.
IONS has developed a program that is still in the early stage of many of their studies, but initial results from one cross-sectional survey indicate that the need for channeling research is definitely there.
We surveyed 3 groups: the general population in the United States, scientists and engineers, and people who are really open to things like channeling. We call them psi-positive people. And we found that these channeling experiences were quite prevalent up in the 90s. 90% of those groups had at least one channeling experience on that range that I told you about. And when you take out like the most common, like gut hunches or being able to sense someone's emotions, it was still in the 80%. So some people think that they might be rare, but it's actually quite common for someone to have experienced some sort of channeling.
So a significant portion of the population does in fact experience channeling. But are the messages actually coming from an entity separate from the channeler? In many cases, channelers relay messages that contain information that they would have had no way of knowing otherwise.
With my friend, I walked into work one morning and she was crying, and I asked her what was wrong, and she said that she had had a miscarriage. She was in her late 30s. She was really concerned that she was never going to conceive again, and that may have been, the last opportunity she had to have any more kids. But at that time, this little girl came through very clearly, and she said to me, tell my mom that I'll be back in a couple months. My soul just was not ready yet for this world. So I relayed the message from her daughter, and then a few months later she was pregnant, and now the little girl is 5 years old, very healthy. At that point I think I started realizing, okay, this might be part of my mission here, is to be a translator of sorts. After that, I started really listening to these messages that would come in, and I would really start noticing if they were a channeling type message, if they were repetitive, and they seemed almost foreign to my own thoughts.
Some would argue that channeled messages such as Noelle's actually come not from disincarnate beings, but rather from within the channelers themselves. There is evidence from previous studies that channelers experience an increase in alpha and theta waves when in a channeling state. This change in brain waves is similar to what has been measured in people who are in a meditative state as well. Is it possible that this meditative state is just allowing channelers to access their subconscious?
There's many spiritual traditions that believe that we are all one. And so when you say, are you going into yourself to find the information? In those traditions, they might say, well, if you're gathering information from beyond yourself, it's still you. I think it depends what filter you're viewing our reality with. But from a scientific perspective, we're always trying to get at how do we test this? How can we evaluate this? Is it really from the person's subconscious? Are they reading someone else's mind? Is it really a separate entity? And there's been a variety of ways to try to evaluate that.
I started thinking about my own path as a mother, or if I even wanted to be one. I really wasn't sure. And then out of nowhere, I hear this little girl's voice say to me, "It's okay, Mama, you're just not ready yet." After that point, for the coming months, she started communicating more and more regularly to me, saying, "This is up to you. I can come to Earth or I cannot come to Earth, and this is a soul contract that I'm presenting to you." And she said, essentially, my job is to guide and love her because she's coming here for a pretty specific purpose. When I got pregnant, pretty early on, I started having some difficulties. Was pretty sick throughout most of the pregnancy, and she would actually be a source of reassurance for me. She told me specifics about the pregnancy that kind of seems outlandish to people. So she told me, I'm coming in December, have everything ready to go. I was thinking, that's kind of crazy. I'm not even due till almost February. So, why are you saying you're coming in December? But later on, it turned out that I needed to be induced because I had severe preeclampsia at the end, and she did in fact come in December. She did tell me she was gonna have some respiratory issues when she first got here, but that she would be okay. She did end up stopping breathing on me. She and the nurse and my husband luckily were right there, but of course I went into panic mode. But then the source of peace for me was that she told me that was coming, and so it was so cool after doing channeling for so many years and helping other people with these messages that she was able to help me kind of heal myself. It kind of made everything go full circle.
One way the team at IONS has attempted to study what's actually going on when a person is channeling is by objectively measuring changes within the environment during channeling sessions. They recently completed a study that put a group of channelers in a room with a random number generator, a device that spits out zeros and ones at a random rate. When the analysis is done, there should be 50% ones and 50% zeros.
There's no physical reason for that to be any different.
But even with all other variables controlled for, they still found a significant difference in the data collected when the subjects were channeling versus when they were just having normal conversation.
So this was a preliminary study, but to me it's really exciting because it's a physical demonstration that there is something different about the environment when people are channeling to not channeling. As we continue this work, we're trying to keep including objective measures, because you could have someone who's sensitive there and say, oh yeah, it's so different when they're channeling compared to when they're not channeling. But to have an objective measure actually support that, I think is great and supports our scientific study of it, perhaps gets at mechanism and opens the minds of the people who are kind of in the middle of that paradigm shift to say, that's interesting. I'd like to learn more about that.
For most channelers, the mechanism that allows channeling to work and the exact source of the message isn't nearly as important as the messages themselves.
Ultimately, the reason why you're channeling is to help relay the greatest healing messages you can from the source. And so for me, that kind of takes the pressure off of me as a human being trying to figure it out. It's like, okay, I'm just gonna quiet my mind, and I'm gonna actually allow my body and my voice to be something that translate these messages to this world.